In 1939, the international standard for musical pitch was officially set at 440 hertz. Every major nation signed on within a decade: the United States, Britain, Germany, France, Japan, countries that agreed on almost nothing else at the time. They agreed on this quietly and without much public debate. What's strange isn't that they agreed. What's strange is what they agreed to replace. For centuries before that decision, music had been tuned to 432 hertz, and the people who built those structures understood something about frequency that we were never supposed to ask about. If you've spent time in this space, you've seen the photographs. Buildings from the mid-1800s that look nothing like anything being built in the same era. Not just large, not just decorative. Structurally complex in ways that modern engineers struggle to explain, built in regions that had no recorded industrial capacity to produce them. The St. Louis World's Fair of 1904. The Chicago World's Fair of 1893. The Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition of 1876, entire cities of white stone buildings, constructed supposedly within a few years, then demolished entirely within a decade. Official history says these were temporary plaster constructions, built fast, torn down fast, nothing to see. But the foundations don't match that story. Neither does the scale, neither does the engineering. Look at the photographs from the 1893 Chicago Fair closely. The structures are not thin shell exhibition halls. They have load-bearing stone columns, multi-story internal frameworks, and sub-ground foundations that go down multiple levels. That is not how you build something you plan to tear down in 3 years. That is how you build something you plan to use. And those foundations, the ones that show up in early 20th century city surveys across the American Midwest, they describe chambers below street level that nobody in the official record can account for. Not storage rooms, not basements, chambers with vaulted ceilings and ventilation systems built into the walls. What often gets missed is that these weren't isolated buildings. They appear across every continent in the same architectural style during the same narrow historical window in cities that were supposedly small frontier settlements at the time. The official explanation is cultural diffusion, European influence spreading through colonialism. But diffusion doesn't explain buildings of this scale appearing in the American interior in the 1860s, when those regions had populations measured in the hundreds. Someone built those structures, and the people who built them had resources, knowledge, and technology that doesn't appear in any official record. Which brings us to the question that connects all of this. What powered them? In 1899, Nikola Tesla built a laboratory in Colorado Springs and began conducting experiments in wireless energy transmission. He wasn't trying to invent wireless electricity. He believed it already existed, that the Earth itself was a resonant conductor, and that if you knew the right frequency, you could draw energy from the ground and the atmosphere without burning anything. He wrote about this openly. He spoke about it in interviews. His financier, J.P. Morgan, pulled funding in 1903 when he realized what Tesla was actually building. Morgan's comment at the time was direct. If anyone can draw on the power, where do we put the meter? The tower was demolished in 1917. Tesla died in 1943, his papers confiscated by the Office of Alien Property within hours of his death. But this is the part that doesn't get connected often enough. Those buildings, the ones with the impossible scale and the ornate towers, look at the roof structures, domes, spires, copper fittings, vaulted chambers built into the upper floors. These aren't just decorative. Dome structures are resonant chambers. Copper conducts electromagnetic energy. Spires function as antenna arrays. Eric Dollard, an electrical engineer and one of the few people who has replicated Tesla's work, has argued that these buildings weren't ornamental. They were functional. Receivers and transmitters built into the physical structure of cities. Think about what that means in practice. If you needed to transmit energy wirelessly across a city, You would need a network of structures capable of receiving and rebroadcasting a signal. You would want elevated copper conductors. You would want domed chambers that could focus and amplify the field. You would want spires positioned at regular intervals across a grid. That is exactly what the old world city plans look like. If you stop reading them as aesthetic decisions and start reading them as infrastructure, the mainstream dismisses this as fringe speculation. But the mainstream also cannot explain how cities of this architectural complexity were built by populations that, according to official census records, didn't have the labor force to build them. There's a gap in the record, and sitting right at the center of that gap is a question nobody in official history wants to answer cleanly. Why, in the same decade that standard musical pitch was changed globally, did we also see the systematic demolition of almost every building from the previous era? Between 1930 and 1945, something happened to the built environment of the Western world. Hundreds of old world buildings were torn down, not because they were unstable. City records from the period frequently described them as structurally sound. They were demolished because they were outdated. Urban renewal, slum clearance, modernization. These were the official justifications, and they were applied with a consistency that, if you look at the geography and the timing together, starts to feel less like policy and more like a program. The same pattern appears in Europe. The Blitz is often credited with destroying London's older architecture, but not all of it was bombed. Some of it was simply cleared afterward, in the same urban renewal wave. Paris, Brussels, Vienna. Same decade, same architectural targets, and the buildings that replace them share one consistent feature. No resonant chambers, no dome structures, no spire arrays. Modernism, they called it, a clean break from the old. But when you lay the timeline flat, the break is precise. The 1939 Pitch Standardization Conference happens. The demolition programs are already underway. Tesla's work is being buried. And, within 10 years, the architectural vocabulary of the entire developed world has been replaced. That kind of coordination across that many governments doesn't happen by accident. It also doesn't happen without a reason. The question worth sitting with isn't whether something was suppressed. The evidence for suppression is there if you look for it. The question is, what exactly was being suppressed? And that leads us to frequency. Cymatics is the study of visible sound. When you vibrate a surface at different frequencies, the particles on that surface organize into patterns. At certain frequencies, the patterns that emerge are coherent, symmetrical, geometrically precise. At 432 Hz, specifically, the patterns produced in cymatics experiments correspond to geometries found repeatedly in nature. The Fibonacci spiral, the hexagonal structures of beehives and snowflakes, the proportions found in the chambered nautilus. This is not a coincidence based on mysticism, it's a mathematical relationship. 432 Hz aligns with the harmonic series that underlies natural resonance. At 440 Hz, the same cymatics experiments produce patterns that are slightly irregular. Off-center. The geometry doesn't close cleanly. Now, hold that. The proportional systems used in old world architecture, the ones you see repeated in buildings across 6 continents in the same century, are grounded in the same harmonic ratios. The golden ratio, the square root of 2, phi. These buildings weren't just aesthetically aligned with natural harmonic ratios. If the theory holds, they were physically tuned to interact with acoustic and electromagnetic frequencies in those ranges. The Great Pyramid at Giza resonates at a frequency of approximately 1.5 Hz in its lowest chamber, a frequency that corresponds to the human brain's theta wave state, associated with deep meditation and heightened perception. Researchers have measured similar acoustic properties in prehistoric megalithic structures across Europe, Newgrange in Ireland, the Howell Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta. These aren't coincidences in engineering, they're patterns. That's the thread that connects the buildings, the frequency, and the suppression. If you could build a structure that resonated at 432 Hz, that was architecturally tuned to the same harmonic series as the Earth's own electromagnetic field, and if you combine that with a power transmission system operating in the same frequency range, you would have something that looked very different from anything we build today. And you would have a very strong reason to make sure nobody remembered how it worked. The Schumann resonance is the electromagnetic frequency of the Earth's ionospheric cavity. It was formally measured and documented by physicist Winfried Otto Schumann in 1952. The base frequency is 7.83 Hz. Its harmonic overtones progress through specific intervals, and when you calculate the ratio between the Schumann fundamental and its overtones, you get a series that maps cleanly onto the harmonic ratios underlying 432 Hz tuning. Schumann published this in 1952, but Tesla had described the Earth as a resonant electromagnetic conductor in 1899, 50 years earlier. Tesla described specific frequencies at which the Earth could be excited into resonance. His measurements, from his own records, fall within the range we now call Schumann resonance. He knew, and the architecture of the period suggests the civilization he was working within also knew, in practice, if not in the specific scientific language we use now. A city of resonant buildings, tuned to interact with the Earth's own electromagnetic field, drawing energy without combustion, broadcasting and receiving in frequencies that aligned with both natural systems and the human body. Consider what that would look like from the outside. No power lines strung between poles, no coal smoke from generators. Buildings that lit themselves, heated themselves, powered whatever was inside them from a field that was everywhere and cost nothing to access once you understood how to tap it. That's not science fiction. That is precisely what Tesla described in his patents and his notes. He didn't think he was inventing something new. He thought he was recovering something that had been understood before and formalizing it in the language of his time. The question of where he got that intuition and what he may have been working from is one the official record has never answered. That's the theory, and the evidence for it sits in the architecture, in the demolition records, in Tesla's suppressed papers, and in a pitch standardization conference held in London in 1939 that the official record has never felt the need to explain. All of it happened in the same narrow window. All of it was coordinated across governments that were otherwise at war with each other. That level of coordination doesn't come from shared aesthetic preferences. It comes from someone who understood what needed to disappear and made sure it did. Here's what the official record gives you. A civilization that appeared across the entire globe in the same century, built at a scale that exceeds the known labour and industrial capacity of the period, demolished within a single generation, replaced by a built environment with completely different acoustic and electromagnetic properties. A frequency standard changed globally in 1939, replacing a tuning system that had been in use for centuries, agreed upon by governments that were otherwise mobilizing for war. A scientist whose entire research program pointed toward free electromagnetic energy transmission died in 1943. His papers immediately seized by the federal government, his laboratory demolished years earlier by the people who funded it. The patterns are there. They've been documented by engineers, by acoustic researchers, by architectural historians who don't agree with each other on much, but do agree that the official timeline has problems. What's missing isn't evidence. What's missing is the connector. The document that ties the pitch conference to the demolition programs, to the suppression of Tesla's work, and says, plainly, This was a coordinated effort to remove a technology from public access. What we have instead is the gap, and a gap this large, this consistent, across this many governments and this many decades, doesn't fill itself. If you've been in this space for a while, you've felt the edges of this question before. The architecture that doesn't fit, the timeline that doesn't add up, the technology that was buried before it could spread. The next video goes into the mudflood evidence and what the sediment layers in those same city foundations actually show. Click it